Dad perfect events. The silver Mercedes parked beside my lake house wasn't supposed to be there. I knew every car that belonged on my property, and this one definitely didn't. I'm Vincent Morrison, 59 years old, and I've owned this lake house for 40 years. My wife Margaret and I bought it when we were young, and it's been our family sanctuary ever since. Margaret passed 3 years ago, but I still keep track of every visitor to this place. I had driven up from Cincinnati that Thursday afternoon to meet Gordon Mitchell, my contractor, about replacing the old dock. The wooden planks were rotting, and I wanted the work done before spring. Gordon was supposed to meet me at 2 o'clock. It was 1:45, so I was early. I parked my truck behind the Mercedes and stepped out. That's when I heard it, laughter coming from inside my house. A woman's laugh, followed by a man's voice. I stopped walking. My hand was already reaching for my phone when I recognized the man's laugh. It was Bradley Sterling, my daughter's husband. He'll be stumped. Son-in-law for the past 8 years. Catherine, my daughter, was supposed to be at work. She's a software engineer at a company in Columbus and rarely takes time off. Bradley works as a financial advisor downtown. He had told Catherine he was meeting clients in Cleveland this week. So, what was he doing at my lake house with a woman who definitely wasn't my daughter? I walked quietly to the side window and looked inside. What I saw made my stomach drop. Bradley was sitting on my couch, the same couch where Margaret used to read her mystery novels on summer evenings. He wasn't alone. A woman I'd never seen before was sitting way too close to him. His arm was around her shoulders. As I watched, he leaned in and kissed her neck. She tilted her head back and laughed again. I felt sick. This was the man my daughter loved, the father of my grandchildren Sarah, who's 7, and little Michael, who's 5. Bradley had always seemed like the perfect husband. He called me dad, helped with family, gatherings, and treated Catherine well, or so I thought. But here he was, in my house, with another woman. My phone buzzed, Gordon Mitchell letting me know he was running 15 minutes late. I didn't respond. I had a choice to make. I could burst through that door and confront them right now. That's what my instincts were telling me to do. But I'm not 25 years old anymore. I spent 40 years as a corporate attorney before retiring. I've learned that acting on emotion rarely leads to good outcomes. Evidence matters. Documentation matters. I stepped back from the window and walked quietly to my truck. I drove back down the road about a quarter mile and parked where the trees would hide me from the lake house. I sat there for 10 minutes, thinking and planning. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. First, I needed evidence, real evidence that would hold up. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out the small digital camera I kept there for insurance purposes. Old legal habits. Die hard. Always document everything. I got out and walked back toward the lake house through the woods. There's an old walking path that Margaret and I used to take in the mornings. It comes out near the storage shed behind the property. From there, I could see the back deck and the large windows facing the lake. I moved slowly and carefully. I didn't want to alert them. When I reached the shed, I had a clear view into the living room. The curtains were open. Bradley and the woman had moved from the couch. They were standing by the kitchen island. He was pouring wine into 2 glasses. My wine. Wine I had bought last fall. I raised the camera and started taking photographs. Click. The woman accepting a glass of wine. Click. Bradley touching her waist. Click. The woman leaning into him. Click. A long kiss. I took maybe 20 photographs over the next 10 minutes. Each one felt like a knife in my chest. This wasn't some impulsive fling. They looked comfortable, natural, like a real couple. This was clearly an ongoing affair. I thought about Catherine, about how hard she worked, about how much she loved Bradley. Every extra hour she spent at the office was supposedly for their future together. And this is what he was doing while she was working. The man and woman moved toward the back door. For a moment I thought they were coming outside, and I pressed myself against the shed wall, but they just stood there looking out at the lake. He wrapped his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him. They looked like they'd done this before, many times. After about 15 minutes, they moved away from the door and disappeared from view. I waited. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. I crept around the side of the shed until I could see the driveway. The woman was walking toward the Mercedes. She was maybe 35 years old, blonde hair, wearing expensive-looking clothes. She looked successful, confident. She got into the Mercedes and started the engine. I raised my camera one more time and photographed the license plate. After she drove away, I stayed hidden for another 10 minutes. I wanted to see what Bradley would do. Eventually, he came out the front door carrying his briefcase. He locked the house with a key to my house. I had given Catherine a spare key years ago, and apparently she had given it to him. He got into his BMW and drove away in the opposite direction. Smart. They weren't leaving together. I waited until both cars had been gone for at least 15 minutes before I walked back to the lake house. I let myself in and looked around. The wine glasses were washed and put away. The couch cushions were straightened. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I never would have known anyone had been here. I walked through the house looking for other signs. In the master bedroom, the bed was made, but not quite the way I remembered leaving it. The pillows were in different positions. There was a slight indentation in the comforter. I stood in the doorway of that bedroom, the bedroom where Margaret and I had slept for 40 years, and I felt rage building inside me, not just for the betrayal of my daughter, but for the violation of this place, this sacred space where my wife and I had built so many memories. Bradley had brought his mistress here and used it like some cheap motel. I took a deep breath and forced myself to calm down. Rage wouldn't help Catherine. Only evidence would. Only a plan. I called Gordon Mitchell and asked him to reschedule. I needed time to think. After he agreed, I sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started making notes. This was what I did best: building a case, analyzing facts, planning strategy. First question: who was the woman? I had her license plate number. I still had contacts from my legal career. I picked up my phone and called Oliver Peterson, a private investigator I'd worked with on dozens of cases over the years. Oliver was discreet, professional, and thorough. I told him I needed information on a license plate. I gave him the number. I asked him to find out everything he could about the owner. He didn't ask why. That's what I always appreciated about Oliver. He called me back 2 hours later. The Mercedes was registered to Caroline Thompson, age 38, home address in Dublin, one of Columbus's wealthier suburbs. Married with one child. She worked as a marketing executive at a consulting firm downtown. Married. She was married too. Oliver continued with his report. Caroline Thompson had been with her firm for 12 years. She managed major client accounts. Her husband's name was Richard. They had been married for 11 years. I asked Oliver to dig deeper. Phone records, credit card statements, whatever he could find legally. I told him money was no issue. My daughter's future was at stake. Over the next 2 weeks, Oliver compiled a comprehensive file. What he found was worse than I had imagined. The affair had been going on for at least 18 months. Oliver found hotel receipts, restaurant charges, even a weekend trip to Chicago that Bradley had told Catherine was a financial conference. He had been with Caroline the entire time. But that wasn't the worst part. Oliver discovered something else that made my blood run cold. Bradley had been making withdrawals from the joint checking account he shared with Catherine. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there. But over the past year, the amounts had increased. $2,000, $3,000, $5,000. Always in cash. Always when Catherine was working late. The total was over $45,000. More shocking, some of this money had come from the college savings accounts I had set up for Sarah and Michael. Bradley had somehow gained access and had been systematically draining them. My grandchildren's education fund was being stolen to support his affair. I sat with this information for 3 days. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Bradley's face. That innocent smile he always gave Catherine. The way he called her sweetheart and told her he loved her. All lies. I wanted to tell Catherine immediately, but I knew that would be a mistake. Catherine loved Bradley. She would want to believe there was some explanation. She might even be angry at me for investigating her husband. No, I needed professional advice. I called Patricia Williams, one of the best family law attorneys in Ohio. We had worked on opposite sides of several corporate cases over the years, and I respected her judgment completely. I drove to Columbus and met with her in her office. I laid out everything. The photographs from the lake house, the license plate, Oliver's investigation, the bank records, all of it. Patricia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "This is bad," she said, "but it's also an opportunity. If your daughter wants to divorce him, she has grounds for fault. More importantly, the financial fraud gives her leverage for custody and property settlement." She explained the legal strategy. In Ohio, adultery doesn't affect divorce proceedings much anymore, but the financial misconduct was different. If Bradley had been systematically stealing from marital assets and the children's education funds, that was dissipation of marital funds. It could significantly impact how property was divided. The custody situation was even more important. Bradley had been lying to Catherine for 18 months. He had been stealing money meant for their children's future. All of this could be used to argue that Catherine should have primary custody of Sarah and Michael. But Patricia warned me that timing was critical. We needed to make sure Catherine was prepared. We needed to have all documentation in order. And we needed to act before Bradley had any chance to hide assets or destroy evidence. That was the hardest conversation of my life. I called Catherine and asked her to come to my house in Cincinnati. I told her it was important and that I needed to discuss something with her in person. She sounded concerned, but agreed to drive down that Saturday. When she arrived, I sat her down in my study, the same study where I had worked on hundreds of cases over the years, where I had always felt most in control. But this was different. This was my daughter's life. I didn't know how to begin. How do you tell your daughter that her husband has been betraying her, that the man she loves has been stealing from their children's future? I started with the lakehouse. I told her about driving up there to meet the contractor, about hearing the laughter, about seeing Bradley through the window. Catherine's face went pale. She started shaking her head before I even finished. "No," she said, "that's not possible. Bradley would never do that." I showed her the photographs. She stared at them for a long time. Her hands were trembling. I watched my daughter's heart break in real time. I had seen this look before in my legal career, when clients realized their world was falling apart. But this was my daughter. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. How long? I told her everything Oliver had discovered. The 18 months, the hotels, the trip to Chicago, Caroline Thompson and her marriage. And then I told her about the money, about the $45,000, about the college funds. Catherine looked at me like I had stabbed her. $45,000, she kept repeating. The college funds, Sarah and Michael's college funds. I showed her the bank records, the withdrawal patterns, how Bradley had timed everything to coincide with her busy periods at work, how he had used her trust and her dedication to her career against her, how he had stolen from their children while she was working to build their future. Catherine stood up and walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, looking out at the backyard where she had played as a child, where I had taught her to throw a softball, where she had brought Bradley to meet Margaret for the first time. I remembered that day. Bradley had been so charming, so attentive. He had helped Margaret in the kitchen without being asked. He had played with Catherine like she was the only woman in the world. We had all been fooled. Finally, Catherine turned around. Her face was different now. The shock was gone, replaced by something harder, something that reminded me of myself when I was building a case. "What do I do, Dad?" I told her about Patricia Williams, about the legal strategy, about how we could protect her and the children. Catherine nodded slowly. She looked older somehow, like she had aged 10 years in the past hour. "I want to talk to him first," she said. "I need to hear it from him. I need to look him in the eye and hear him try to explain this." I understood, but I asked her to wait just a few more days. We needed to make sure everything was in place. We needed to secure the remaining finances before Bradley had any chance to move things around. Catherine agreed. She trusted me. She had always trusted me. Even as a little girl, when she scraped her knee or had trouble with homework, she would come to me. "Fix it, Daddy," she would say. And I always did. This time would be no different. Over the next week, Patricia and I worked quickly. We subpoenaed bank records, we documented the joint accounts and Catherine's retirement funds. We gathered every piece of evidence into a comprehensive file. Patricia also discovered something else that made the situation even more urgent. Bradley had been in contact with a real estate agent about investment properties. He was asking questions about selling the lakehouse, my lakehouse. The property had been put in Catherine's name years ago for tax purposes, but Bradley was apparently researching whether he could force a sale in a divorce. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about him systematically planning to destroy everything my family had built. I also made one more phone call, not to Bradley, not to Catherine, but to someone else entirely. I called Richard Thompson, Caroline's husband. He answered on the third ring. His voice was pleasant, unsuspecting. He probably thought I was trying to sell him something. I introduced myself. I told him I was sorry to bother him, but I had information about his wife that I thought he should know. I told him I had evidence of an ongoing affair between Caroline and my son-in-law. There was a long silence. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was ice cold. He asked me to send him the evidence. I sent him a selection of the photographs, the hotel receipts, the trip to Chicago. Richard called me back 2 hours later. He thanked me. His voice was shaking, but he thanked me. He said he had suspected something for months, but couldn't prove it. He said this explained the late nights, the business trips, the unexplained credit card charges. We talked for almost an hour. 2 fathers united by betrayal, trying to figure out how to protect our children from the fallout. Richard had a 12-year-old daughter. Like me, his primary concern was protecting his child from the chaos that was about to unfold. By the end of the call, we had agreed to coordinate. We would confront our spouses at the same time, so neither Bradley nor Caroline would have a chance to warn the other. They would both be blindsided, just like we had been. We set the date, Sunday evening, 1 week away. Catherine came to my house Saturday night. She was staying with me, so Bradley wouldn't suspect anything. She had told him she was visiting an old college friend who was going through a difficult time. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We sat up late that night talking. Catherine told me about her marriage, about how things had seemed fine on the surface, how Bradley had always been a good father, always helped with bedtime stories and weekend activities, how he had supported her career, encouraged her to take on challenging projects. I keep thinking about all the times he said he was working late, she said, all the times I felt guilty for not being home with the kids because I was at the office, and he was with her. She asked me if I thought he had ever loved her. I didn't know how to answer that. I told her that people are complicated, that sometimes they convince themselves that lies are justified. But what mattered now was not the past, but the future. Her future, the children's future. Catherine nodded. She seemed calmer than I expected, more resigned. Maybe the shock had worn off and left only determination in its place. She reminded me of myself when I was preparing for a big case, focused, ready. Sunday morning, we drove to Columbus together. Patricia met us at Catherine's house at 4 o'clock. We went over the plan one more time. Catherine would confront Bradley alone initially. Patricia and I would wait in the study, ready to step in if needed. We had all the documentation ready. Bank records, photographs, hotel receipts, everything organized in a folder like we were presenting evidence to a jury. I had already texted Richard Thompson. He was going to confront Caroline at the same time, at their home across town. We had synchronized our watches like we were conducting a military operation. At 5:15, I watched through the window as Bradley's BMW pulled into the driveway. He had been at his office, supposedly preparing for client meetings on Monday. Sarah and Michael ran to the front door when they heard his car. They always got excited when Daddy came home. Bradley hugged them both, swinging Michael up in the air the way he always did. For a moment, watching him with the children, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I thought about the $45,000, about the college funds, about what he was planning to do to this family. Catherine sent the kids upstairs to their playroom. She told them Mommy and Daddy needed to have a grown-up talk. Once Sarah and Michael were safely out of earshot, she turned to face her husband. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice was steady, controlled. Bradley's smile faltered slightly. "About what?" Catherine didn't answer immediately. She walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. Bradley followed, looking confused. He sat across from her in the armchair, the same way they probably sat every evening discussing their day. I watched from the study doorway. Patricia was beside me, ready with the legal documents if things escalated. Catherine started talking. She told Bradley about the lakehouse, about me seeing him there with another woman, about the photographs. Bradley's face went white. He started to speak, but Catherine held up her hand. "I'm not finished," she said. She told him about the investigation, about Caroline Thompson, about the 18 months, about Chicago. Bradley was shaking his head, trying to deny everything, but his voice was weak. He knew he was caught. Then, Catherine told him about the money, about the $45,000, about the college funds, about how he had been stealing from their children's future to pay for his affair. That's when Bradley's demeanor completely changed. The denial stopped. Something harder appeared in his eyes. Something desperate. "Who told you all this?" he demanded. "Your father? He had no right to spy on me. He had no right to invade our privacy." Catherine's voice remained steady. "He had every right to protect his family." Bradley stood up. He was agitated now, pacing. "You don't understand. Caroline and I, it's not what you think. It's complicated. The money, I was going to pay it back. I was making investments. I was trying to build something for our future. By stealing from our children?" Catherine's voice finally cracked slightly. "By lying to me every day for 18 months? I could see tears in her eyes, but her resolve didn't waver. She had practiced this moment in her mind. She was ready. Bradley tried a different approach. He sat back down, reached for her hand. "Catherine, sweetheart, I know how this looks. But I love you. I love our family. This thing with Caroline, it's over. I'll end it today. We can work through this." Catherine pulled her hand away. "It's too late for that." That's when I stepped into the room. Bradley saw me and froze. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I thought about all the family dinners, all the holidays, all the times he had called me dad and thanked me for accepting him into our family. "The evidence is irrefutable," I said calmly. "Your affair with Caroline Thompson is documented. The financial theft is documented. And right now, at this very moment, Richard Thompson is confronting his wife with the same evidence." Bradley's face crumbled. He actually staggered backward like I had physically pushed him. The realization that his entire world was collapsing hit him all at once. Bradley looked at Catherine. He started begging, pleading. He said it was a mistake. He said it didn't mean anything. He said he loved her and the children and would do anything to make it right. He promised to go to counseling, to cut all contact with Caroline, to pay back every penny. Catherine listened. She let him talk. She let him make his promises and his excuses. And when he was finished, she spoke 2 words. "I want a divorce." The next few months were difficult, but not in the way I had expected. Bradley tried to fight at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photographs, the bank records, the testimony of Richard Thompson, who had filed for divorce from Caroline on the same day. Patricia Williams was brilliant. She used the financial fraud to argue that Bradley could not be trusted with the children's welfare. She presented evidence of his systematic deception, his poor judgment, his willingness to put his affair above his family's financial security. The fact that he had stolen from the children's college funds was particularly damaging. The judge was not sympathetic. In the end, Catherine was awarded primary custody of Sarah and Michael. Bradley got supervised visitation every other weekend. The property settlement was heavily in Catherine's favor, accounting for the $45,000 he had stolen. He was also required to repay the children's college funds with interest. Bradley's career didn't survive either. Word got out about his financial misconduct through the legal proceedings. His firm conducted their own investigation and discovered he had been borrowing from client expense accounts to fund his lifestyle. They let him go quietly to avoid a scandal, but his reputation in the financial industry was finished. Last I heard, he was working for a small investment company in Dayton, making a fraction of what he used to earn. Caroline Thompson didn't fare much better. Her husband Richard divorced her and was awarded custody of their daughter. Caroline lost her job when the affair became public knowledge and affected her professional relationships. The marketing firm she worked for decided she was a liability they couldn't afford, but the real victory wasn't in their punishment. It was in what we had protected. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Catherine. She had been offered a promotion at work, a senior engineering position that came with a significant salary increase. The company wanted to send her to a conference in San Francisco to announce her new role. "I can't leave the kids," she said. "Sarah's still adjusting to everything, and Michael asks about his father every day." "What if I came to stay with them?" I suggested. "Sarah and Michael love having Grandpa around, and you deserve this opportunity." Catherine was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "It's a whole week." I was sure. More than sure. This was exactly why I had fought so hard. So Catherine could build her career without worrying about who she could trust with her children. So Sarah and Michael could have the stability they deserved. That week was one of the best weeks of my life. I picked the kids up from school every day, helped with homework, made dinner. Sarah told me about her friends, about the books she was reading. Michael showed me his drawings and asked me to tell him stories about when Mommy was little. On Friday evening, we drove up to the lakehouse. It was the first time any of us had been there since that Thursday afternoon 6 months earlier. I was nervous about how it would feel, but the kids were excited. They had always loved the lake house. We spent the weekend fishing from the new dock Gordon Mitchell had built, swimming in the lake, roasting marshmallows over the fire pit. Sarah caught her first base, a small one, but she was so proud. Michael found a family of ducks and spent an hour trying to convince them to let him pet them. On Sunday evening, as we were packing up to leave, Sarah asked me a question. "Grandpa, why doesn't Daddy come to the lake house anymore?" I had been dreading this question. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her father had violated the trust of this place? That he had brought his mistress here and used it for his affair? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said carefully. Big mistakes that hurt the people they love. Your daddy made some mistakes that hurt your mommy, and you and Michael. The lake house is a special place for our family, and we need to keep it safe and happy. Sarah nodded solemnly. Like how mommy says we can't hit people even when we're angry. Exactly like that, I said. When Catherine returned from San Francisco, she was different, more confident, more at peace. The promotion had gone well, and she was excited about her new responsibilities. But more than that, she looked like herself again. The woman I had raised, strong and capable, and ready for whatever came next. "How were the kids?" she asked. "Perfect," I said. And they had been. No tantrums about missing their father, no difficult questions. About why their family was different now. They were adjusting, healing, moving forward. A year later, Catherine started dating again. She met someone through work, a software architect named Philip, who was divorced himself with 2 kids of his own. He was patient with Sarah and Michael, never trying to replace their father, but building his own relationship with them. When Catherine brought Philip to meet me, I watched him carefully. I listened to how he talked to the kids, how he treated Catherine, how he responded when Michael spilled juice on his shirt. This time, I would be more careful. This time, I would trust but verify. But Philip seemed genuine. He had been through his own difficult divorce and understood the challenges Catherine faced. He didn't push for more time than Catherine was comfortable giving. He respected her boundaries and her children's needs. 6 months ago, Catherine and Philip got married. It was a small ceremony at my house in Cincinnati, just family and close friends. Sarah was the flower girl, and Michael was the ring bearer. They both seemed happy, excited about their new family. As I walked Catherine down the aisle, she squeezed my arm. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered, "for everything, for protecting us, for handling it the right way." I thought about that Thursday afternoon at the lake house, about the choice I had made to step back and build a case instead of storming in with anger and accusations, about the phone call to Richard Thompson that had changed everything. Sometimes justice isn't about anger or revenge. Sometimes it's just about giving people the information they need to make their own choices. The truth, delivered at the right time, in the right way, can be more powerful than any confrontation. Bradley made his choices. Caroline made hers. They both have to live with the consequences. And Catherine rebuilt her life stronger than before. She knows her worth now. She knows what real love looks like, and what manipulation looks like too. Most importantly, Sarah and Michael are safe, their future secure. That phone call to Richard Thompson changed everything, not just for our families, but for our children's futures. One call, that's all it took. I learned something important that day at the lake house. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't anger or confrontation. It's patience, evidence, and knowing exactly when to act. My grandchildren will never know how close they came to losing their future, and that's exactly how it should be. When someone you trust betrays your family, don't let emotion cloud your judgment. Evidence and strategy will always defeat lies and manipulation. A father's greatest victory isn't destroying the enemy, but ensuring his children never have to fight the same battle twice.